See you guys. Let's start seated. You guys look like you're have a nice comfy seats, ready to roll. We'll just allow our body the opportunity to find some stability. Maybe let the eyes close and some softness, some slowness, some fluidity in your breath. In the center of this town square, there's this great big giant Siberian elm. It is currently beginning to buckle under the weight of heavy snowfall. Just slowing down the rate of respiration and increasing the depth of the experience of that respiration. Give ourselves just 30 more seconds here. Enough time to feel the slowness of our breath. And when it feels appropriate for you, let's let the eyes open if they're closed. We'll exhale and release the chin down to the sternum. Turn the palms up if they're not facing up already, and then retract the scapula just a bit and try to create some width across the shoulder girdle. And then really slowly with an inhale, let's bring our head back to neutral. So as slowly as we can move the head so it matches the full depth of the respiration. And as you get back to that neutral, whenever that happens, with no rush to make that through, just make sure that your cervical spine is vertically stacked. That might require a little retraction of the chin, jaw architecture. And then let's reverse that. With an exhale, we're going to very slowly drop our chin down to our sternum. And just trying to allow the movement of the head to match the duration of the breath. And then reversing back to neutral, inhaling nice and slowly, the chin back to neutral, and finding that vertical cervical spine stack. Now with an exhale, let's take our chin over to the left. Again, let's do the same thing, really nice and slow with the full duration of the breath. And then we'll inhale the head back to neutral. Nice and slow, full duration of the breath. Same thing back to the left side, exhaling out to the left. And no rush, but when you're ready, returning back to neutral. Nice and slow. As you realign at neutral, make sure you've maintained that width across the shoulder girdle. Just make sure that the cervical spine now stacks neutrally. And we'll do the same thing to the right side, exhaling nice and slow to the right. And eventually, when it's Synced with your breath, returning nice and slowly back to neutral. Thinking about that full neutral reset, and then same thing to the right side one more time. Nice and slow. And then eventually, nice and slow, returning with the full duration of your breath back to neutral. And once again, just when you arrive, rebalancing, realigning, and reintegrating here. And let's finish this off with a lift of the chin. So we'll exhale out as we lift. Full extension here. Think about how the cervical spine is moving into this extension architecture. And then returning to neutral at the inhale, nice and slow. Full duration of the breath. And once again, making sure that the cervical spine vertically stacks. And one more time, let's lift the chin with the exhale. And eventually return with the inhale to that neutral stack. Just finding your way into a nice full vertical spinal column stack, letting your eyes close if that feels accessible to you. Just being really stacked and at ease here. When it feels appropriate for you, if the eyes are closed, let's allow them to open. We'll turn the palms down if they're facing up, and we'll let the fingers grip onto the legs somewhere. That can be the knees, the thighs. You can even just grab over the quads. But we just want to have something that we can provide a little strength with. And with an exhale, let's push the belly forward, lift the chin, allow the tailbone to roll back. And then we're going to inhale back to neutral. Now we're going to do an exhale the opposite way. So belly button's going to go back, chin's going to tuck. And the torso can start to rock back enough that you can use the leg grip to help extend this flexion articulation of the spinal column. And then we'll inhale back to neutral. When you exhale, chin lifts, belly forward, tailbone back. Full duration of the exhale, and then as you inhale, we return to neutral. And there's a lot of movement in the spine. Kind of can be easier to feel all the individual pieces moving, the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, when we're in this vertical stack, as opposed to tabletop. And then exhaling and letting the chin tuck, the belly button draw back, maybe the shoulders even go forward. And let's just move a few more times with our own breath cycle, just allowing your body to explore this extension, flexion, articulation, a little cat-cow with a vertical modification. and a breath modification. So we're using inhales to come back to neutral instead of inhales to go to extension. Exhale in both of the expansive directions. Maybe 15 more seconds here. Or maybe one more time in each direction, whichever comes latter. Eventually, it goes back to neutral. And let's transition to staff, extending our legs out in front of us. From staff, think about getting the spine as vertical as you can comfortably get it. And think about enough core engagement that you can keep that verticality. Then let's take our right hand over to our left thigh and let our left hand come behind us, and just vertical torso, vertical spine as you start to rotate, maybe even gaze behind that left shoulder. The more height that you can keep in the spinal column, the more availability for the rotation. And then we'll eventually come back to neutral. Let's do the same thing to the second side. Left hand to right thigh, right hand behind you. Get that rotation. As you rotate there, really think about your capacity to keep the verticality of the spine. The more upright we can keep the spine, the more capacity for rotation here. And then eventually we'll come back to neutral. And as you get into this neutral stack, let's just start to soften forward. So knees may come up into a nice full bend here to allow for this forward movement. Think about being soft more than anything else. Just how can we soften into a forward fold? Anyone who's been around Siberian elm knows the plant, knows the tree. It is a aggressive grower. It is an aggressive propagator. It is both extremely brittle under tension and incredibly dense, heavy, and notoriously hard to cut. And so as this Siberian elm in the center of this town square begins to buckle, this massive Siberian elm in the center of this town square begins to buckle under the weight of the snow. The splintering sound of the wood can be heard for maybe miles in the silence of the snowfall. And the snow finally pauses long enough people to clearly see what has happened. It's very clear that this tree has seen its last day. And now there is this huge, heavy, very difficult cut project in the middle of this town square. We'll give ourselves just 40 more seconds here. Really thinking about how you can soften into this fold. And it feels appropriate for you. Let's bring ourselves back up to a nice vertical spinal column stack. So if you can feel some of the space or some of the potential space in between the vertebrae, and let's take the left hand behind us, the right hand to the left thigh, and find a nice vertical twist once again. Maybe gazing over that left shoulder, maybe comparing and contrasting to the first time we were here. Can you feel additional rotational capacity? And can you appreciate that any additional rotational capacity has come from the spacing out of the structure of our spine? Relax back to neutral. And same thing to the second side. Left hand to right thigh, right hand behind you. Nice vertical spinal alignment as you rotate into the twist. Eventually, we'll come back to neutral. And just be at ease. Let's take both of our blankets here. And from a shelf fold, let's fold them hot dog style. And stack those, maybe alternating the fold direction so that we have as stable a center as possible. And we're going to lower ourselves onto our back. Feel that neutral base underneath you. Allow yourself the opportunity to absorb the neutrality of your mat. And then eventually, when it feels appropriate for you, let's take our blankets, lift our belt line high enough that we can slide the blankets underneath for a little supported bridge. Here, we're looking to land kind of center of mass of the blanket prop so that you have as much stability at the center of the sacrum as you can possibly create with two folded blankets. And then let your palms roll up, maybe even squeeze the scapula a little bit more intently underneath you. And feel the center point of your breath at the center point of your sternum with every inhale. So that maybe there's even a little additional extension, articulation of the spinal column as you inhale. For some of us, if we put enough of this extension energy in the inhale, you may feel some posterior chain pull around the thoracic joint. Kind of a nice feedback loop of a little bit of shortness, a little bit of tension, a little bit of dysfunction. If we're getting that feedback, and see if you can just breathe into that so that every cycle of respiration becomes more and more easeful. So this little village with this little town square with this now fallen massive Siberian elm. starts getting some quotes on what it's going to cost to remove this massive, heavy tree from the center of their town square. And every single one of the quotes they receive comes back at dramatically more than they can afford with their little town budget. And so they hold a meeting, what they can do. They can resolve this problem. Kind of everyone goes into this meeting with the idea that someone within the community will volunteer to remove this problem, fallen tree. The reality is it is a project that will have extensive costs, that will require skilled labor. And no one really has a solution until someone pipes up and says, what if we, instead of viewing this as a cost, we viewed this as an opportunity? What if we auctioned the tree off to, and the community kind of goes into this uproar, auction the tree off to who's going to pay money to remove this problem? Community member says, hold on. I'm not saying remove it. What if we auctioned it off to an artist or a group of artists, and they turned this problem into a art piece in the center of town? Pretty quickly, the tone of this meeting changes. And people start to see the opportunity here. They have this huge fallen blank slate that an artist could turn into anything. And so an auction date is set. No one expects anyone to pay a lot of money, but still, an opportunity to create something in the center of this village is got to be worth something to someone. It's a heck of a lot better than paying someone more than they can afford to remove it. Maybe recheck in with where the center of your respiration is landing. Maybe recheck in with any tension that you're feeling or had been feeling in the posterior chain. Maybe recheck in with that scapula retraction, that broadening of the sternum. We'll give ourselves about 60 more seconds here. Opportunity to feel any change you've created. And then when it feels appropriate for you, push down into our heels and toe mounds, lift our belt line into a bridge, slide those blankets out from underneath us, And just lower the tailbone down to the mat. Keep the knees bent for a moment. And just feel that full neutrality. And then we're going to push down into our feet, just like you're energizing your feet into the mat. And instead of lifting the tailbone up, think about pushing the crown of your head further towards the top of your mat. And then release and see if you can just settle the spine almost into a traction sensation. So we can get just a little more space between the vertebrae, and we're just going to pause here. Try to let that settle. If you fully relax both the feet and the core, the spine kind of compresses back, almost like a slinky. But if we can keep just enough energy that we can be relaxed, but also maintain the length, you can let your spine settle into that space. Maybe we can really draw out some length here. And then when you're ready, when you've felt that sensation of spinal column expansion, let's grab our blankets and we're going to set those on either side of our thighs. You can probably guess where we're headed, but we're going to try to do this with the extension or the decompression energy of the spine. So we're going to push down into those feet once again, drive the spinal column or the crown of the head towards the top of your mat, and then try to keep that energy as you transition the bottoms of the feet towards one another. And then as the bottoms of the feet come together, if you can keep that spinal length, if you keep just enough tension between the bottoms of the feet, you can really maintain that space. How you allow the lumbar to set will really be determinants of how much length we can keep in the spine. So while we want the lumbar to push more towards neutral, we also want to keep enough abdominal engagement and kind of anterior musculature engagement that we don't just completely deactivate. You may notice that the abductor musculature also is firing a little bit more than you might have it traditionally, and that may require you to change the geometry of or the positioning of your blankets. As you get more and more settled, as you find more and more ease, the goal will eventually be to completely relax while keeping as much of this spinal column length as is possible. And eventually finding your way back into just as fluid and delicate a respiration as you can. Slowing everything down. The day the auction comes, everyone has kind of decided. But the best place, but the best steward of this project is going to be this local kind of art school. It is an art school with a lot of wealthy students. And it is an art school that is very well integrated into this community. And everyone just kind of expects that that will be the steward of this project going forward. At the same time, the dean of this art school has put a very strict budget on what they're going to be willing to spend on this project. And so when another bidder pipes up, the community is kind of aghast. And there's a reason. This other bidder is kind of an outsider in the community, a recluse that lives on the edge of town and who doesn't have a reputation in the community of being particularly artistic. And so as these two bids go back and forth between this art school and this recluse, the community kind of becomes on pins and needles. They're on edge. They're very worried that this recluse might, for whatever reason, win this. And as it turns out, the recluse bids more than the dean has allowed this school to bid, and the recluse wins the auction for this fallen art project. And as the spring temperatures begin to warm up, recluse shows up in the center of this little town square with this old, worn, and relatively dull axe. And he starts swinging this axe relatively obtusely into this huge canvas. And he starts taking these huge chunks out of this fallen tree. And almost immediately, the community members are horrified. People start coming up to him and pointing at the dullness of his axe. He looks at the axe and he acknowledges it's not particularly sharp. Of course, he knows that Siberian elm is a tree known for dulling sharp instruments. A tree that beavers generally will avoid if at all possible. And a tree that even if he sharpened his axe every day, he would leave with a dull and relatively blunt instrument at the end of the day. And so he ignores and continues to take these large chunks out of this fallen tree. At the end of the first day, people kind of observe what he's done, and it does not look artistic. It does not look skilled. It doesn't even necessarily look competent. People start complaining. As the community gets more and more to be aggressive. Members of this art school start to come down and they start to openly, publicly, and loudly mock this recluse or the unartistic, the lack of elegance in his tooling. And for the blunt, maybe even amateurish approach that he's taking. And he hears everything that's said and smiles and nods and continues to swing this axe with as much energy and force as he can muster so that he can continue pull these chunks out of this incredibly dense, incredibly heavy, incredibly difficult fallen tree. Give ourselves about 60 more seconds here. Maybe an opportunity to reconnect with that lengthening energy to see if you can settle the spine into as much linear expansion as is possible before we transition out of this shape. Be in as much ease as is possible. You settle into that length. When it feels appropriate, and with this idea of spinal column length in mind, let's transition the feet back to the mat and the knees pointing back towards the ceiling. And we can remove our props and just let your body settle once again. See if you can feel any difference in how your body sits, particularly in the lumbar spine. And then we are going to add some dynamic rotation to the knees, some exploration of rotational capacity here. Just finding as much softness and ease as is possible. Really fluid in your rotations. Maybe one or two more times in each direction. And then we're going to settle into a twist with our knees falling to the left. And as you settle, really think about what the most beneficial positioning of the rotation would be. So you could take that top leg and tuck it under the lower leg. The right leg the heel can tuck under the left thigh if that's accessible. You could shift the hips to the right a little bit so that the hips end up more stacked, so that there's a little bit more focus on lumbar rotation. Or you could be a little bit softer and the right knee could be more or less aligned with the arch of the left foot, or anywhere in between, right? Look for the twist that you can settle into that will be the most beneficial and most impactful for you. And then just settle into that. As the months ticked on and the heat of summer came, this recluse would still spend several hours a day at this fallen elm. And for several hours a day, he would be striking this elm with this axe and removing chunks of this log. And the project had not taken on any more beauty. Some members of the community had kind of been talking themselves into all art projects start rough and they become more refined as things move along, but that had not happened. And so the members of the community continued this outspoken criticism of this recluse. People starting to encourage this recluse to step away from this project and give it back to the art school before their beautiful town center was kind of permanently damaged. And this recluse would hear all of these comments. Sometimes he'd hum a little tune, but he always met them with kindness and a smile. And this continued through the summer months with no real change in the shape or the tools of this artist. Give ourselves just another 60 seconds here on this first side. When it feels appropriate for you, let's bring our knees back to neutral and set your body to experience the neutrality here. Think about the length in the spinal column, linear expansion, balance on the right and left side. And then when it's appropriate, let the knees fall over to the right. And we're doing the same thing. And the same thing may be a different, most beneficial twist, but you have all of those options. The left heel can tuck underneath the right, the hips can stack, the legs can splay more like windshield wipers. But we want to find the shape that we can comfortably settle into with the maximum sensation of benefit. As the summer months started to give way to the change into fall or autumn, the community members started to complain about these piles of discarded wood chunks. And this recluse had kind of just been creating these piles all around, and hadn't done much, if any, cleanup. And so he heard all of these comments, and instead of cleaning them up, he covered them in tarps. And still, every day, someone would come by. Most frequently, it was someone from the art school that would come by to criticize his technique, to laugh at the blunt instrument he was using, to laugh at the abomination of an art project that he was creating. And his response continued to be just a polite smile, courteous nod, and a determined focus on swinging this axe into this heavy, burdensome wood pallet or wood canvas in front of him. Eventually, the leaves went through their color change, began to fall off the surrounding trees. Some of the tarp-covered piles of wood would start to blend in as they got covered in leaf fall. Eventually, the winter snows started to threaten this little town square once again. Last 30 seconds here. When it feels appropriate for you, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. Let your spine settle. Ask yourself if there are any tweaks or adjustments or movements, modifications that you could offer your body prior to Shavasana. And if there are, let's offer them now. If you have everything you need, if you're ready for some stillness, let's drift into a shape where we can appreciate some stillness. Almost a year had gone by, and even the defenders of this artistic project had now kind of turned on the idea. They'd looked at the mess that this recluse had made, these piles of discarded scraps, and the lack of any artistic vision in this artistic project that was the center of this town square. And so they called another meeting, the community meeting, to try to rectify this mistake. And as the members of this community gathered in this town square, that first winter snowfall that had been threatening to come for a few weeks now arrived. The members sat in this little chair in this chairs in this town square. These huge, heavy snowflakes started to pile up around them and on them. And there was still maybe 10 minutes before this meeting was supposed to begin. Just finding your version of stillness and ease here. Suddenly, from behind everyone, this recluse pulled the tarp off of one of these discarded piles of scraps. He gathered as much of the scraps as he could into his arms. People started to look back like he was going to start cleaning up the project now. It's a little too late. And he walked over to the community hearth. He shoveled the wood into the hearth and set the fire. And the entire meeting space received the warmth, firewood Lucid created. Start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes. Into your wrists and your ankles. Your elbows and your knees. Shoulders, your hips, your neck, your head, your jaw, your tongue. Eventually, the entirety of you will move, and we'll utilize that movement to transition our way into a seat. In the seated space, and gets tall, breath gets fluid, eyes close. Feel the verticality of your spine and the fluidity of your breath. And we'll inhale our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you remind yourself that when your purpose and your identity are clear to you, external judgments become inconsequential? See how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this morning's practice and for being you. Namaste.